When it comes to famous German ships of the Second World War, you probably think about Bismarck, Tirpitz, the twins, but you probably don't think about Germany's Panzerschiffe of the Deutschland-class. These strange ships with their 11-inch or 28-centimeter guns were certainly some of the oddest cruisers of the Second World War. But if you're like me, a question you might have is what happened to these strange vessels? Well, I think you might know. Nevertheless, though, we're going to cover the fate of the three ships of the Deutschland-class. We're going in order of when they were commissioned, starting off with Deutschland, whom had her name changed to Lützow during the war. After the Battle of the Barents Sea in early 1943, Lützow remained in northern Norway. However, after this failure on January 6 at Führer HQ, Hitler ordered the decommissioning of all heavy units, resulting in the resignation of Admiral Raeder, being replaced by Admiral Dönitz, who managed to have the decommissioning order partially rescinded. In March, Lützow was shifted to Alta Fjord as Tirpitz and Scharnhorst arrived in Bogen Bay. For the next several months, she did not see action as she had problems with her diesel. This caused problems as she was to be battle-ready at all times. Repairs were carried out and she participated in group exercises in July and August. In September, she began the return journey to Germany in stages and made it to the Baltic port of Gottenhofen, with Captain Stange stepping down in November. Captain Conke was appointed her commander in January as an overhaul continued on the ship. The cruiser began working up in March with a full war complement of 1,156 officers and men aboard. After working up, she joined the fleet training group with Prince Eugen, Admiral Scheer, Nürnberg, Emden, torpedo boats, E-boats, and the gunnery target ship Hessen. With summer came shore bombardment practice and battle training in the Gulf of Finland, as it was feared that Finland might leave the war, which the nation soon did. On July 8th, Lützow took part in the last naval review of German warships. The following week saw Lützow hoping to protect German land units falling back following the departure of Finland from the war. As the calendar changed to fall, Lützow, much like the remaining heavy units, began shore bombardments against Soviet forces in Memel near the Schwab Peninsula, in one day expending well over 1,000 shells from her various guns. The naval units worked in rotations, returning to Gottenhofen to rearm. Schwab had fallen by the time she was relieved by the Admiral Scheer on the 23rd of November. Lützow escaped the devastating bombing of the port city of Gottenhofen in mid-December and moved to Pilau towards the month's end. From February onward, Lützow, Admiral Scheer, and Prince Eugen worked in rotation to bombard Soviet forces in East Prussia, which on the 8th of that month, escorted by T-8, T-28, and T-33, she bombarded Soviet advance columns off the coast. German defenders in the area were crumbling as a column of refugees hindered their fighting ability. She continued her rotations of shore bombardments and rearming, helping to defend Gottenhofen and other ports, managing to survive several bombing attacks at Swinemunde until the 16th of April, when a British Lancaster bomber achieved a near miss and opened up a large hole on the side of the ship, and she assumed a 56-degree list. Two 1,000-pound bombs also hit the ship in the forward and aft main battery magazines, failing to detonate. She was hit in shallow water, and therefore, with the help of a salvage vessel, she was restored to an even keel, where the starboard 5.9-inch guns and A turret were pumped dry, and by the 28th, she resumed the bombardment of Soviet land forces. Her last commander, Captain Ernst Lange, was appointed in April. By that time, only gunnery personnel remained on the cruiser, as the rest of the crew had been formed into emergency infantry units. Once all the ammunition had been expended, and it was clear that the situation could not improve, the order was given to scuttle the ship. On the 3rd or 4th of May, scuttling charges were set, and she was sunk in place. The eventual fate of the wreck is not known for certain. Some say she was seen at Kronstadt in 1948 and 1949, while it's more likely this was the Admiral Hipper-class vessel sold to the USSR. Other sources report that she capsized and sank off Kolberg while under tow, or that she was used in weapons tests. Whatever the case may be, the Lützow is no longer around, and therefore sunk in some manner following the war. I think something interesting is how a story develops as more information becomes available to not only myself as a writer and researcher, but as it's made available to the general public. One book when making these specific types of videos that I like to look at is Spoils of War: The Fate of Enemy Fleets After Two World Wars by Aidan Dodson and Serena Kant, where they detail the end of Lützow in a lot of detail, and I'll just paraphrase what they say. Lützow was partially flooded following her damage from the bomb hits, and salvage work began sometime in late 1946, and she was refloated the following summer, but was required to run pumps constantly. From July 20th through the 22nd, 1947, she was towed to Danzig Bay by the icebreaker Voynets and the tug MB-43, with a number of bombs and shells placed on the ship for upcoming trials. A 250-kilogram bomb was detonated within the ship's conning tower at 8:25 in the morning, blowing a hole in its floor and throwing the rangefinder into the sea. At 12:45, another bomb was detonated, this time a 500-kilogram bomb triggered below decks amidships, destroying the foundation of the catapult and penetrating the main deck. The next two were detonated at 3:45. A 500-kilogram bomb in the forward main battery turret jammed a gun at its max elevation and peeled open the forecastle. At 4:15, the ship began settling forward, 30 degrees, with the bow completely submerged, sinking shortly after in 113 meters of water. Next up, we have the Admiral Scheer. I know we've covered this on the channel before, but in a video like this, we can't miss out on talking about the buried Panzerschiffe. The pocket battleship spent the first few months of 1945 helping to defend against Soviet advances through shore bombardment, as well as helping to carry refugees to safety. But because of the constant wear and tear, the ship needed some help, and one of the only places that could help her was Kiel. Arriving on March 18th, where she went to the fitting out basin of the Deutsche Werke near the cruisers Admiral Hipper and Emden. As I previously mentioned, by this time, Allied bombers were operating virtually unopposed in the air and were mainly threatened by scattered concentrations of anti-aircraft guns. To help in the defenses, the anti-aircraft guns and ammunition aboard the Admiral Scheer were taken off to hopefully provide for the defenses of the city and surrounding area. Unfortunately for the Admiral Scheer, her heavy armament was unserviceable because of the proposed barrel changeovers. B-turret completed the exchange on the 8th of April, and because of the constant threat of air attacks, a proposal to bring the ship out into Heikendorf Bay was put forward on the 10th to have a floating crane assist in the exchange of the turret barrels. Some of the ship's company had been disembarked, including most of the cadets. So the following night, when the bombers came overhead, a majority of the ship's company was off the ship. Gerhard Koop and Klaus-Peter Schmolke have this to say in their book, Pocket Battleships of the Deutschland-class, Warships of the Kriegsmarine. At 9:50 p.m. on the 9th of April, there was an air raid warning and most of the remaining crew went to bunkers ashore, leaving aboard 90 or so officers and men of the damage control parties. The first bombs began falling at 10:30, and the ship was first hit at 10:38 p.m. At 10:45, hits caused lighting and command relay systems to fail, and the cruiser assumed a list of 16 degrees to starboard. But power was restored long enough to get the ground vents open and make compensatory flooding to halt the list at 18 degrees. At just after 10:45, as consequence of further hits and near misses, the list increased quickly to 28 degrees, at which point the engineer officer of the watch gave the command to leave the electrical plant running and gave the command to abandon the ship. The order did not reach all of the centers because of the electrical failures, although individual posts were abandoned as soon as the gravity of the situation became apparent. The remaining crew climbed through burning and smoke-filled rooms to reach companionways and portholes. Some crewmen were killed or injured by falling machinery and components. Despite the asphyxiating condition and their exhaustion, groups dragged injured and unconscious shipmates to safety, those not being able to swim the few strokes to the quayside being picked up in the water by small craft. Salvage workers from Emden cut into the hull in several places, and rescue teams scoured the upturned hull for 42 hours in the search for survivors. Having discharged her ammunition and fuel, Admiral Scheer was high out of the water and ballasted with a small amount of seawater in the double bottom. She capsized over a period of 12 to 17 minutes in 15 meters of water, the primary cause being the large gash on the starboard side caused by near misses. All 8 members of Damage Control Party 1 and 7 other crew members, including 3 engineer cadets, were left entombed in the mangled remains of the ship. The mangled remains of the Admiral Scheer and the other German vessels were captured in the devastated city of Kiel by the advancing British forces in early May 1945. Kiel was largely destroyed in World War II, especially the dock area, since this was a major port city for Germany and the Kriegsmarine. Where in this photo, you can see the mine layer Bluma, the former Norwegian Olav Tryggvason, and a Type 21 U-boat. There are a number of photos taken of the Admiral Scheer, mostly taken by British authorities, like this one, which reveals two things. A really good view of the capsized warship with a prefabricated bow piece of a Type 21 U-boat in the foreground, and the valuable metals that could be salvaged from the warship. Or this photo where you can see the capsized warship in the ruined dockyard along with the bombed-out city of Kiel in the background. The armor plate and propellers found on the ship contain metals that could be reused for other applications. So, under British authorities, work began breaking up the wreck in July 1945, where all valuable metals, gun houses, and turrets were removed before the bare torso of the ship was abandoned where she lay. It seems that she was broken up in a number of ways, being cut up with welding torches and the possible use of explosives. As the scrapping process got on its way, the ship moved slightly to allow for the scrappers to get to parts of the ship above the waterline that were now below. Much of the scrap metal went on to Britain to be processed, and by the following July, the scrapping had come to a completion because of the cost of further efforts to scrap her, as it would require the ship to be towed elsewhere to finish the job. So what was left of the Admiral Scheer, which were pieces of the hull, were left where they sat. By 1945, the reconstruction of Western Germany was beginning, and the principal Baltic naval base of the future and past German Navy was no exception. So when it came time to begin building the new naval arsenal, the remains of the mangled hull were covered over with rubble to become the foundations of a new large parking lot, with the ship's remains most likely being in this area. As for the crew that were entombed in the ship, I could not find a source that says they were removed from the ship. According to the recent survey from the Institute of Geosciences at Kiel University, of which I'll place a link to the survey so you all can read it, the wreck was partially cleared after the war, with the bow removed up to the forward engineering spaces, and the stern was removed to the beginning of the armor belt, with the remaining midship sections cleared down to the waterline and subsequently buried by sand and other debris in the early 1950s, as I mentioned before. Using photographs from the time that she had capsized, and specifically this one from March 29, 1949, the research team used the surrounding buildings that are still there to find an approximate location of the buried Admiral Scheer, and through the use of magnetic gradiometry, ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic induction, and electrical resistivity tomography were all used to help find the remains of the Admiral Scheer, which I can assure you all of those are way above my head. The report concludes by stating that the photo from March 29, 1949 represents the state in which the Admiral Scheer was buried, which they claim large parts of the hull superstructure has been preserved, though buried under 3 meters or about 10 feet of sand and other debris. You should really go take a look at the paper, it's really very interesting, and they have some of the models they made using the scans, which are amazing. Finally, the Admiral Graf Spee. I've covered her story here, link on screen now. But in brief, the German Panzerschiffe Admiral Graf Spee began her wartime career as a commerce raider in the South Atlantic and Indian Oceans, successfully sinking 9 Allied merchant ships while strictly adhering to international prize rules. Her raiding streak came to an end on December 13, 1939, when she was intercepted by a British squadron consisting of the heavy cruiser HMS Exeter and light cruisers Ajax and Achilles in the Battle of the River Plate. She sustained significant hits herself, which critically crippled her oil purification, desalinization, and galley systems, and left her dangerously low on ammunition. Seeking refuge in time for repairs, Captain Hans Langsdorff brought the damaged warship into the neutral harbor of Montevideo, Uruguay. Hemmed in by the shadowing British cruisers and deceived by Allied intelligence into believing a massive British naval task force was waiting just outside the river's mouth, Langsdorff faced a hopeless situation where escape or victory was impossible. To preserve the lives of his crew and prevent the ship from falling into Allied hands, Langsdorff made the executive decision to sail into the estuary and scuttled the Admiral Graf Spee on December 17, 1939. For the people of Montevideo, Langsdorff, the crew, and the British crews waiting outside Montevideo, this was going to be quite the eventful Sunday. So crowds began gathering along vantage points, eagerly to watch the Panzerschiffe and comment on the movements. Then, late in the afternoon, just before she could leave port, a large ensign was drawn up on the foremast and then a second one on the mainmast, and slowly the ship began to weigh anchor, and soon the ship was on her last voyage. To many observers, the ship appeared to be a powerful fighting machine still, and they thought she was going into action as she steered towards the entrance of the channel to Buenos Aires and Argentina. But this was not to be, as Langsdorff steered his ship into position to be scuttled, and two Argentine tugs came alongside and disembarked the rest of the crew minus the scuttling party, and began doing their jobs as the ship sailed into a mud bank. By 8:40 p.m., the scuttling party had just completed their task and climbed into the launches and were taken off to the tugs. At 8:54, just as the sun dipped below the coastline, a flash of explosions could be seen from the ship. The time selected for the fuses to go off had been chosen with the Teutonic flare for heavy drama, because at 8:54, as the sun dipped below the coastline, a sudden flash of flames leapt from the ship, followed by a vast double explosion. The center of the Graf Spee seemed to dissolve into a swirling black smoke which twisted upwards in tortured spirals towards the darkening sky. The pocket battleship's crew, scattered in tugs, the barge, and the Tacoma, stood to attention, giving a salute. And this indeed was the end of the Admiral Graf Spee. This was all observed by the large crowd of onlookers, the two waiting British cruisers, and the Graf Spee's crew as they watched and saluted the ship as she was ablaze and settled onto an even keel. Following her dramatic scuttling in December 1939, the shallow wreck of the Admiral Graf Spee sat partially exposed in the silt of the River Plate estuary. Allied intelligence teams acted quickly, covertly boarding the remains to strip her of highly classified, advanced radar technology before the elements took over. Over the following decades, the heavy warship gradually succumbed to the environment, sinking completely beneath the muddy waters, settling into a thick layer of liquid mud, where treacherous currents and near-zero visibility made diving hazardous. In 2004, a high-profile salvage operation backed by private investors and the Uruguayan government commenced, aiming at raising large portions of the vessel to clear the busy shipping lane and preserve historical artifacts. Divers initially found success, removing a massive 27-ton gunnery rangefinder in 2004. In 2006, they raised the ship's 800-pound bronze stern eagle, which featured a prominent Nazi swastika. The discovery ignited fierce international legal battles and political controversy over the display and potential sale of Nazi iconography. Although Germany claimed ownership and urged that the artifact not be commercialized, Uruguay's Supreme Court eventually declared it state property. Subsequent government proposals to melt the eagle down and recast it into a bronze peace dove was swiftly abandoned following intense public backlash. Today, the ambitious plan to raise the remaining hull have been entirely halted due to prohibitive costs, leaving the shattered hull buried in the riverbed. The three pocket battleships certainly had interesting fates. It's fascinating to know that the three are technically still around. But let me know what you think about the three ships down below and their fates. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have an amazing week.